Forget the image of pirates doing nothing but drinking rum, chewing on hardtack, and swinging swords across wooden decks. The truth is much stranger. Before many Caribbean pirates became infamous sea raiders, they were poor hunters who survived by smoking meat and selling it to passing ships as provisions. And that smoked meat gave birth to one of the most famous words in pirate history, buccaneer. From smoking racks on the island of Hispaniola to the fiery bite of modern Jamaican jerk, from the chaotic pirate dish known as salmagundi to the mojito and pina colada served in modern beach bars, pirate food was never just food. It was a story of survival, violence, trade, disease, alcohol, stolen goods, cultural mixing, and how men living outside the law accidentally left their mark on the modern table. From the moment human beings began using ships for transportation and trade, pirates were never far behind. Where there was sea commerce, there would always be someone willing to rob it. Even powerful figures in history became victims. Julius Caesar, when he was young, was captured by Cilician pirates while traveling to Rhodes for study. The Vikings used long ships and sharp blades to raid almost every coast of Europe.
But the pirate image we know best today, the tricorn hat, the curved sword, the rum, the skull flag, the wild men who seem both terrifying and strangely romantic, mostly comes from the Caribbean in the 17th century. And the most interesting thing is this: the first Caribbean pirates were not necessarily born as pirates. They began as poor hunters. In the early 17th century, on the island of Hispaniola, today divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, groups of poor English and French settlers lived by hunting wild animals. They hunted wild cattle, feral pigs, and other animals on the island. Then they preserved the meat by smoking it and sold it to ships passing through the Caribbean. At that time, a ship on a long voyage needed food that could last. Fresh meat spoiled quickly, but meat that had been salted, seasoned, and smoked could survive much longer. So smoked meat became an important livelihood for these poor hunters. That meat was called buccaneer. The word came from an indigenous Caribbean smoking technique. The meat was placed on a wooden frame and slowly dried over low fire and smoked for a long time. Later, the hunters who specialized in making buccaneer were called bucanier in French, which became buccaneer in English. And that is one of the origins of the word used for Caribbean pirates in Western culture. At first, a buccaneer was not a pirate. He was a hunter, a smoked meat maker, and a supplier of provisions for ships. But then Spain, the dominant power in the New World, tried to monopolize trade. The Spanish did not want poor English and French settlers freely hunting, selling, and supplying food on land Spain considered its own.
When their livelihood was cut off, these hunters gradually changed professions. From selling smoked meat to merchant ships, they began attacking merchant ships. From hunters in the forests, they became pirates at sea. This origin helps explain why pirates in Western popular culture are sometimes not portrayed simply as villains. They often carry the color of anti-heroes, outsiders pushed to the margins, resisting monopolies, challenging empire, living by their own rules, and defying power on the ocean. Of course, real pirates were not as romantic as movies make them seem. They were still raiders, violent men, and dangerous criminals. But their image remains fascinating because it blends crime, freedom, rebellion, and survival. And part of that story began with smoking racks of meat. The buccaneer made by the buccaneers was not picky about ingredients. They used whatever meat they could hunt or obtain. It might be wild cattle in the New World. It might be domestic pigs that had escaped and turned feral. At times, it could even be large sea turtles, fatty animals, though not always pleasant in flavor. The process usually began by rubbing the meat heavily with sea salt to draw out moisture. Then the meat was brushed with a mixture of pepper, lime juice, and allspice, a distinctive Caribbean spice with aromas that seemed to combine cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and pepper. After seasoning, the meat was placed on a wooden frame and slowly smoked over low heat for a long time. The smoke seeped into the meat, drying it, flavoring it, and helping preserve it. To create a wilder, more intense flavor, people sometimes threw animal skin, bones, or other parts into the fire, making the smoke even heavier and more aggressive.
This was not elegant food. It was food of the forest, the sea, and people living on the edge of empire. Salty, smoky, spicy, a little sour, dense with the smell of wild animals. But that same spirit still survives in one of the Caribbean's most famous dishes today, Jamaican jerk. If boucan was the smoked meat of the old buccaneers, then Jamaican jerk may be its closest spiritual descendant. Jerk also relies on strong seasoning and slow grilling or smoking. In the traditional method, the meat must be marinated overnight. Then it is cooked for hours, often 2 to 4 hours or more, so the smoke and seasoning can sink deep into the meat. Unlike many American barbecue styles, which often rely on thick, sweet, glossy sauces brushed over meat, Jamaican jerk depends more on fresh, hot, aromatic plant-based seasonings. The two souls of jerk are allspice and Scotch bonnet pepper. Allspice gives it a warm, sweet, lightly spicy, unmistakably Caribbean aroma. Scotch bonnet is a famously fierce pepper. Its heat can reach hundreds of thousands of Scoville units. But what makes it special is not just the heat. It also has a clear, fruity aroma, almost like peach, apricot, or ripe tropical fruit.
So jerk is not simply spicy. A good piece of jerk has layers. First a little sweetness and fragrance, then a green, sharp freshness from the herbs and spices, and finally a burst of serious heat. In Jamaica, many old jerk shops have their own family recipes. These recipes may be guarded for generations. Some places are even said to require apprentices to keep the marinade secret. Each shop has its own balance of allspice, Scotch bonnet, onion, garlic, thyme, ginger, lime, sugar, salt, and other seasonings. Jerk is not just food, it is Jamaican identity. There is even a story that Usain Bolt, the legendary Jamaican sprinter, loved eating jerk at a local shop while growing up in Sherwood, Kent. Later, Jamaican media joked that the fuel formula behind Bolt's speed might be hidden in the kitchen of that jerk shop. Of course, that is only a joke, but it shows how deeply jerk is tied to Jamaican pride. From buccaneer hunters smoking meat on Hispaniola to fiery jerk on the streets of Jamaica, we can see a clear line. Caribbean food has always been connected to smoke, fire, spices, survival, and cultural mixing. After the buccaneers left behind the smoked meat trade and stepped onto ships with muskets, machetes, and rum, they quickly stopped being satisfied with the blue waters of the Caribbean. They sailed farther, across the Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, into the Indian Ocean. There, they set their sights on rich merchant ships filled with jewels, silk, silver, gold, and spices from the great trading empires. By the early 18th century, pirate history entered its most famous period, the Golden Age of piracy.
One major turning point came in 1713 when the Treaty of Utrecht ended a major phase of war in Europe. The great powers began cutting back their navies and disbanding armed private forces at sea. Thousands of sailors, mercenaries, and privateers suddenly lost their jobs. They knew how to sail. They knew how to use weapons. They knew how to attack ships. But now, no one was paying them. Many chose the most familiar path available, piracy. This was the age of legendary names: Henry Every, Blackbeard Edward Teach, Bartholomew Roberts, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and many others. In Nassau, an almost abandoned English colony in the Bahamas, pirate crews gathered and formed what people later called the unofficial Republic of Pirates. It was not a nation in the modern sense. It had no official constitution, no recognized diplomacy, and no approval from the empires. But for a short time, Nassau became a base for men living outside the law, a place where pirates repaired ships, divided loot, drank rum, recruited crews, and prepared for the next raid. And on those ship decks, amid the smell of salt water, gunpowder, rotten wood, and rum, one particular dish became famous: salmagundi.
Salmagundi is a name that sounds rather elegant, even mysterious. Its origin is often linked to an old 16th century French word, suggesting the act of taking scattered, disorderly things and building them into a complete whole. In Europe, Salmagundi began as a refined salad for wealthier people. It might include vegetables, fruit, edible flowers, cold meat, fish, seafood, eggs, oil, vinegar, and spices. Everything could be arranged beautifully as a rich cold platter, part decoration, part meal.
But once this dish climbed aboard a pirate ship, almost all elegance disappeared. What remained was only the spirit of throw everything together. On a pirate ship, Salmagundi became a true mixed-up feast. Whatever they had, they used. Fresh meat from a recent raid? Throw it in. Old salted meat from the hold? Throw it in. Dried fish? Throw it in. Pickles, boiled beans, wilted cabbage, dried onions, strange herbs, spices, pepper, mustard, sugar, oil, vinegar, throw it all in. If the flavors became too chaotic, the amateur cook on board had only one solution. Add more oil, vinegar, sugar, pepper, mustard, and seasoning to cover the mess. To be honest, calling this a refined Salmagundi is probably too generous. It would be more accurate to call it pirate stew. But this dish was extremely practical. When provisions were running low, Salmagundi allowed pirates to gather every leftover dried scrap, salted piece of meat, wilted vegetable, and pinch of seasoning into one pot. It did not need to be pretty. It did not need to be delicate. It only needed to be edible and filling enough to keep the crew alive at sea. When pirates had just captured a rich prize, Salmagundi took on another meaning. A captain could throw in good meat, seafood, rare ingredients, and expensive spices to show off wealth, raise morale, and prove that the latest raid had been a success. So Salmagundi had two faces. When the crew was poor, it was a dish of leftovers. When the crew was rich, it was a dish of display. But most of the time, it was simply an ordinary seafaring pot meal, a mixture that gave pirates something to eat besides rock-hard ship biscuits and watered-down liquor. And that is exactly what made it so pirate-like. No order, no elegance, no fixed recipe, but perfect adaptation to circumstance. If we had to find one modern group of people who might owe pirates an unexpected thank you, the answer might be bartenders. During the height of pirate culture, especially between about 1713 and 1730, the men wandering the sea helped develop a way of thinking very close to the modern cocktail. Mix strong liquor with sweetness, acidity, fruit juice, and spices to create something easier to drink, more enjoyable, and sometimes even useful against disease. Of course, pirates were not bartenders in the professional sense. They did not have polished shakers, crystal glasses, elegant bars, or the standards of the International Bartenders Association. They had only strong liquor, sugar, lime, fruit, water, spices, and very practical needs. Make it drinkable, make it more enjoyable, make it help against sickness, and make life at sea a little less miserable. On ships, fresh water spoiled easily. Strong liquor kept better, but drinking hard liquor straight all the time was not exactly pleasant, so people mixed liquor with water, lime juice, cane juice, sugar, mint, or spices. This softened the burn, added acidity, and sometimes helped fight scurvy by providing vitamin C. From that logic, we can see the shadow of the cocktail. Among the classic cocktails of today, two were often linked to Caribbean and pirate traditions, the mojito and the pina colada. The modern mojito is considered a classic Cuban cocktail, but its ancient prototype is often connected with the English sea captain Francis Drake in the late 16th century. According to legend,
that drink was not only for getting drunk, it was more like a medicinal liquor. Cool, sour, sweet, fragrant, and much easier to drink than raw spirits. Over the centuries, as white rum, soda water, sugar, lime, and mint became standardized, the mojito became one of the most famous cocktails in the world. A good mojito was a clever balance of opposites: cool mint,
sour lime, sweet sugar, sparkling soda, and the warm burn of white rum. It is both refreshing and intoxicating, tropical and clean. It is no surprise that Ernest Hemingway's name became tied to the mojito, helping turn it into part of the romantic image of Cuba in the eyes of the world. If the mojito is the cool taste of Cuba, then the pina colada is the sweet dream of the tropics. Pina colada is made with rum, pineapple juice, and coconut cream. It is creamy, fragrant, sweet, lightly tart, and immediately brings to mind beaches, sunlight, swimming pools, and vacations. Legend connects the pina colada with the Puerto Rican pirate Roberto Cofresi in the 19th century. According to the story, he mixed rum with pineapple and coconut to raise the spirits of his crew during celebrations or periods of rest. Whether this story can be fully verified is another matter, but it fits perfectly with the Caribbean imagination: an aristocratic pirate, a ship, blue water, rum, pineapple, coconut, and a crew in need of a little joy amid a dangerous life. Today, the pina colada is the queen of beach bars and poolside parties. It no longer carries the smell of gunpowder or rain, but in its flavor, there is still something deeply Caribbean. Hot rum, soft coconut, bright pineapple, and the feeling of escaping from ordinary life.
Looking back, pirate food was never as simple as it appears in movies. It was not just rum and hardtack. It was not just rough meals on wooden decks. Behind it was a complicated current of history. Pirates were violent men, and there is no need to romanticize them. They robbed, threatened, killed, and lived outside the law. But because they lived at the crossroads of many worlds, Europe, Africa, indigenous America, the Caribbean, empire, trade, slavery, war, and smuggling, their food also became a strange place of mixture. It was the cuisine of people without stable land. The cuisine of wooden ships, smoked meat, sea salt, lime, hot peppers, rum, stolen spices, and ingredients no one knew would still be available tomorrow. And perhaps that is why these foods remain fascinating today. Because in every fiery piece of jerk, there is still the smoke of old boucan racks. In every chaotic mixed salad, there is still the shadow of Salmagundi on a pirate deck. In every mojito or pina colada at a seaside bar, there is still a distant echo of the Caribbean, a place where trade, violence, survival, and pleasure once mixed together like rum, lime, sugar, and smoke. In the end, pirates may have disappeared from the ocean in the way we imagine them, but their flavors have not disappeared. They are still there, in grilled smoke, in sharp heat, in cold cocktails, and in the human ability to turn the most chaotic things into a meal that can tell a story.